Now we will begin our last session of today, session 17, and I'll request Mr. Jatin Das to come up to the dais and Mr. Ashoke Viswanathan. Mr. Jatin Das and Mr. Ashoke Viswanathan. The topic is art and aesthetics as an integral part of life and inspiration. Have we reduced our dependency on art as a form of influence? Mr. Das.
Can somebody play this later, not immediately?
Sorry?
Can somebody use it on the laptop because I don't know how to do it? I told them before.
You want to show it now?
Yeah. In 5 minutes, I will speak. They can load it.
Please. Can we have the lights on? Mr. Das wants the lights on. Can we have the lights on? Mr. Jatin Das is a well-known artist and Mr. Ashoke Viswanathan is a very well-known filmmaker. I don't think they need any other introduction. They're all there in the speaker's profile. I would request Mr. Jatin Das to start the proceedings. Thereafter, Mr. Viswanathan.
Thank you. Namaskar. I've been listening to energy, and I know nothing about the energy that you are talking about in terms of electricity. But I recognize the primordial energy. And in our country, in our tradition, in our various aspects of life, we do go into the roots, to the history of the originator of the universe, the earth. And I wish the great scholars and CEOs of various companies, those who are present here, if we talk about the primordial energy of and the 5 elements of nature, from where we all, including an artist, also take this energy and carry it further. I would like to connect with what Jaya was talking about, or Kalikesh talked about the mining and all that. Incidentally, I'm from Mayurbhanj, where the Raja of Mayurbhanj brought the geologist and the Tatars did the thing. We talked about, Jaya talked about the handicraft, the craftsmen, the farmers. After farming, during the day, after lunch, they do some craft on their veranda. And all over the country, they don't live inside the room, they live on the outer veranda of their house. And I remember after the super cyclone in 1999, various people came to Orissa and were willing to fund and build houses for the villagers. And I told the Chief Minister that let them only suggest and build the columns and the roofing pattern, the rest of them be done by the villagers themselves. It's very sad that the traditional houses, the vernacular houses in many parts of the country, because of various natural disasters, have been destroyed, whereas in Kutch, when they had the earthquake, the Kutchi villagers told them, just build our columns and roof and the rest of the house will complete it. So if you go to Kutch now, you will feel as if these houses have been standing there for 200 years. So having said that, my concern here is art and aesthetics in public space. When you look at our houses, our town planning, our villages, but before that we have to look at the art of nature. Only if we relate to art of nature, then we can possibly talk about the man-made art. If you look at the highways, all the 500, 800-year trees have been cut off, and there have been no plantation at all. If you look at the hills, as they're talking of mining, all the forests are gone. The area where they're doing mining in Orissa, there is a herbal forest that's completely been destroyed. Of course, the animals are now coming to the towns, and the forests are gone. The forests produce, which are used by tribals. There is no forest left. So, I mean, that aspect of art of nature. The rivers are filled with sand, there is no dredging done. In Gujarat, they have built concrete walls for the Sabarmati River, whereas the river doesn't not like to be guided by these walls. And my concern is that when an architect or planner build, before which the politicians and bureaucrats, those who decide these programs and projects, it's very unfortunate that in our country, these have been done by mindless, look at the ad hoc planning. And like as you take a drive in Goa or likewise in any part of the country, beautiful architecture, beautiful vernacular architecture, next to which some ugly concrete building has come up. And there's no urban art commission, there's no bylaw, maybe there are bylaws, but I'm surprised people who look at these beautiful things, how can they possibly build something ugly next to it? So there is something seriously wrong in our country about all aspects of life. Recently I was invited to IIM Bangalore. So as I entered, I said, it looks like a building designed by B.V. Doshi. So the director who was escorting me, so I said, who is the architect? He said he didn't know who is the architect. And I telephoned Doshi and I said, Doshi, this feels like yours. He said, of course, I designed this in 1980s. So there was a time, say 2200 BC, the Khandagiri caves within the city limits of Bhubaneswar, the Kharavala, the king, there are inscriptions where it says how much of money was spent at that time building those giant caves. Then in the colonial period, if a building was done, they had a placard at the entrance, who was the architect, who was the engineer, how much money was spent. They were proud of it. Today, innumerable monuments, buildings, trees, forests, natural heritage and man-made heritage have been destroyed all over the country. And sometimes the PWD, the Public Works Department, said this is not safe to live in. But there is something called restoration and stitching and conservation of these so that this monument can stay. And 90% of our antiquity have gone out of the country. They are stolen, firstly by the British took away, and others, they're still going on. Temple idols have been stolen and taken away. Buildings have been broken down. And as Jaya was talking about, say for instance, the handicraft and the handloom. Say, in many parts of India, the weavers are now using synthetic dyes, and they're also using synthetic colors. But revival of that can only take place because if the consumer, if the people need that kind of material. And this is why Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay used to say that because, no, the weavers of our country survive because women wear sari. As simple as that. Now, if a craft is produced, like the lady earlier talking about the toys for children, and I mentioned that there are hundreds of varieties of beautiful toys. We have something in Orissa, Bengal called lacquer terracotta. Terracotta, then it's lacquered, and so the child will not be able to do it. And it's waterproof, and they're very beautiful, and there are only 2 families left. The applique work in IPPAI have been totally destroyed, and all kinds of ugly colors have come into being. The Banarasi weavers have gone to Orissa, and in the ikat sari pallus are now large designs of Banaras weavers' designs are being replaced by the Banaras weavers. So likewise, every day, every month, every year, things are being destroyed in the country under our nose. And we have to not only have a regulation. You see, during the British time, as Jaya was talking about, when you sell a craft on the pavement, likewise the British talked about, we as contemporary artists have a placard that I am an artist, and you have a resume and you have a catalog. When you have a show, books are published on us. But the British talked about the traditional artists as craftsmen and artisans. But some of our traditional artists are much greater than our contemporary artists in the country. So I think it's very important that we look into these aspects. Now, 90% of our young youth in the country, in the big cities, in the urban areas, in the metros, they do not speak their mother tongue. They only speak English. They don't eat traditional food. So through the language, through the food to their culture, today they don't read their poetry. They don't know their, all the bureaucrats and politicians have no knowledge of Indian art in general. When I say art, I mean dance, music, theater, painting, architecture, any aspect of it. In the 50s, there was a proposal for a Congress conference in Puri. And somebody went to Gandhiji and said that there are copulating postures on the temple, they should be covered up. Somehow, there was a great artist from Shantiniketan who went to Gandhiji and said, you can't talk about this kind of things. In recent past, we have had moral policing, people who are going and destroying works of artists. And as you know, Hussein had this problem, and talking about that here is a Muslim, here's an artist who is painting our goddess naked. And all our sculptures in the country, they're all bare figures, all our paintings. But this is not a part of our education system. It's not a part of our syllabus. So the people in general have no idea of their art and culture. Now, Nehru promulgated that 2% of the total cost of the building should go towards acquiring works of art. This was done in the 50s. And till today, although there are thousands of architects in the country and thousands of artists, but it's not conceived. If you look at the Kerala murals, if you look at other places all over the country, there are sculptures, there are paintings, there are murals, etc., done in the temples. But in modern India, unlike Mexico and elsewhere, where the architect and the artist came together and they designed the buildings right from the planning stage and conceived these works of art as embellishment. Now, look at here, Mayawati. Mayawati, the chief minister, previous chief minister of UP, got herself made to large, double than life size of sculptures put up all over UP and Lucknow. And it's horrendous. You cannot imagine that they have large walls like this size, boundary walls to these spaces with nothing inside, and sculptures were put up and nobody objected to it. And how can a politician or anybody build large sculptures of themselves during their lifetime and put it up? And there is no law which forbids them. On the other hand, here somebody does a cartoon and Mamata Banerjee puts this gentleman, a professor, behind bars. And whereas Nehru's and others used to laugh at when there was a cartoon, and he used to tell the cartoonist, will you send me this cartoon? I would like to keep the original. So there is some serious loss of sense of art and aesthetics in our society in many levels. Whether it's culinary art, whether it's our fabric, whether it's our handicraft, architecture, town planning. If you look at Jaipur as a city, Jaipur was a modern city 500 years ago. What beautifully conceived, and how it's contemporary and traditional Indian architecture. Even Lachian, what he has done is one of the extraordinary work where Mughal and Islamic and Hindu and Gothic combines together. And today we do not have genuine contemporary Indian architecture. And so this loss of art and aesthetics in our day-to-day life, then only things will happen. Let's say, for instance, what do you call, trees. The trees on the roadside, a lot of cities now, you see, they're cemented and concrete and suffocated the tree. And it's Ravi Vahan in Delhi who made it possible that all the trees should be shifted to a particular, and the pavement should be inside, the trees should be outside on the edge, and there should be a 4 feet by 4 feet exposed earth so that it can breathe, and things like that. Now, if you look at all this situation, now then there is what you call the television, the invasion of television into your private space. And in one hand, we talk of, in the print and electronic media, in the one hand, they're talking about the naked figures in the temples and condemning or the policing the contemporary artist's work. And to the extent, as I said, Hussein was, he went away and he never came back, and he died outside the country, which is horrendous. But on the other hand, the kind of visuals that appear in electronic and print media is ugly and pornographic, and nobody objects to that, you know. So, in print and electronic media, say, for instance, Raja Ravi Verma paintings were reproduced in the form of calendar, the lithographs were made, and to the extent even sweet boxes were made with the painting, the visuals of the painting reproduced. And so it could percolate down, and to a common man could buy a calendar. And in the modern times, you can have a CD and listen to Kumar Gandharva or Bhimsen Joshi, you know. So some of these modern times we can, but how much and no more, like plastic toys, as we are talking about. Now, I'm going to show some of the visuals. If can somebody put up, I don't know how to use the computer. Oh, but I told them before coming here. Oh, they just have to put a CD and... Oh, I see. Yeah. I told them 5 days ago. Yeah. There, yeah. You want to say something? No.
Good evening or good afternoon, afternoon melting into evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're at the fag end of, obviously, and people are restless and we have only embers of the house, so I'll be very, very brief. But I'll also say that although this subject is of a very serious nature, I hope you'll forgive me if I'm not always all that serious. First of all, I was a little perturbed myself for 2 or 3 reasons. One is I come from Bengal, and this is a seminar on energy. And if you remember that very old joke that in Bengal there's Mukherjee certainly today, Banerjee, Chatterjee, but very little energy. That was the situation in the 70s, in fact. The second problem is that when I speak of power, and I'm sure somebody must have mentioned this earlier, came in the afternoon, power is a double-edged sword, and I think Jayaji did mention that. And the other aspect of power is the corridors of power, and as Lord Acton so beautifully put it, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So be that as it may, I have certain trepidations in dealing with this subject, which as Jatin Das so rightly pointed out is art and aesthetics in the public space. And I do believe that in everything we do, there is an art to it and there's a culture to it. Which is why I would be happier, and I'm very happy that I've been invited here by the IPPAI. I'd be happier if art and culture were not given a separate slot, because there is an art to power, and there is a power to art also. In the way we speak, in the way we move, in the way we breathe, there is art. And the moment we realize this, we will realize that the problems that besiege us, which Jatin Das so rightly spoke about, the way we take from nature and then we just leave nature away, the way we destroy, this will not be our mindset if we realize that culture and art and industry and development, all of that is integrated. Somebody was talking about education and how we have followed the Western model. I think this is the problem. In the Western model, right from Aristotle's Poetics, there has been a distinction between form and content. When he talks about diegesis, diegesis is the total story space, the total dramaturgy in theater, as it were. He always divides into form and content. But in our Upanishads, as Tagore has written many times, in our Vedas, in our Puranas, we've always found that art is such that form and content are indivisible. Sometimes the form is the content. If you look at a Kathak dance, the tukra that is being actually shown, that is the content. It doesn't have to mean something. Why is it that we say that a particular raga, when we hear a yaman, it is evening when you play a yaman, or a night when it is darbari? That is the state of the mind. You come into the night even in the day, which is why Bhairavi, which used to be played only in the morning or sung in the morning, is now sung throughout, because that's the state of the mind. If it rains in the mind, then a malhar can be sung or played. I feel this is the basic problem. We need to understand, comprehend that in whatever we do, and particularly in development, which is sometimes a very dirty word today, we need to understand that that development has to be integrated with art and culture. The problem with development is that we develop at the cost of other things or to the benefit of a few. Development means vested interests, which is why you have a session on security tomorrow on Naxalism. But make sure that that session is not a biased session in which we identify at the very outset that those who protest are the criminals. Not so. What are they protesting against, and who are these so-called Naxals? This has to be made clear. We are not always, in houses which don't have glass doors. We must realize where we are. And I was really pained to hear what Mr. Das was saying as he painted a proper picture of society in India today. Jayaji also gave a very beautiful exhortation, I would call it, in which he talked about the craft of consumerism, the way craftiness has supplanted craft, where craft has been displaced and craftiness has taken its place. So I think today, if we look at our culture, if we look at the way we write, one of the most important things is the script. Where does our script come from? From the Tamra Lipta on which it was written, from Brahmi, that was the original script, from Kharoshti, from Kutila Lipi, from which the Bengali language came into being, and the script for that. So there is an art to it, the way you write, because you used to write on the Tamra Lipta. If you look at poetry or literature, it's always integrated with the way we live. If you look at a Vidyapati, what does he talk about? He doesn't just talk about the seas and the water and the sky. He talks about life. In fact, I can remember a famous poem of Tagore, and I don't remember it exactly, but he says that there was a man who wanted to attain heaven. And so he started praying. And he prayed day in and day out. And the gods of heaven, they were surprised and they were alarmed, because they thought if he prays day in and day out, he's going to attain heaven, and we don't want a human being in heaven. So they sent down all kinds of disasters. It rained, it hailed, it stormed. Then they even sent a beautiful girl who gathered twigs to tempt him. But he would not be tempted, but he fell ill because of the rain and the hail. And the little girl, she cared for him, and she was not really all that little. And she came to care for him. But he sent her away, and he went on praying. And finally, one day, the God of heaven came in front of this man and said, "You have attained heaven." And the man said, "I no longer want it." "What do you want?" "I want the girl who gathers twigs." In other words, it is life that is more important. We do not want to attain heaven. We want to be in our space, in our very own indigenous cultural space, in which, if you look at it, all the customs that have come from this truly plural society, India is a truly plural society. I was talking to Mr. Suleiman while we were coming. He was supposed to speak in the morning. He's the Energy Secretary from Madhya Pradesh. He was saying that it is our society in which we do not identify anyone as belonging to a particular religion or to a particular class or a particular caste, because we have had all these upheavals. We've had the Buddhists, as Jatin Das was telling me. We've had a huge period, the Buddhist period. We've had the period of Chandragupta Maurya, in which Kautilya was the Machiavellian Brahmin who advised. And we had culture, which really flowered in a region which later became the Gupta period, in which we had these jewels. We've had the Muslim, we call it invasion, but it's been an osmosis. We've been integrated. It's been syncretic, and even the British period. So India now is a society which cannot rid itself of any of these influences. It's a totality. The moment we realize this, that it is a totality, we will rise above this regionalism, which Jatin Das talked about. We will rise above it, and we need to rise above it. That is what I think is most important. Art and aesthetics, in my opinion, is part of life. The history of art is the history of man. The moment man came on this earth, he said this, and he said this, and he said that. What is this if not acting? It is art. And that's where we began, and that's where we're going, and that's where we're moving. And I'd like to end by a small quote from a very famous Bengali poet called Jibonananda Das, one of the great poets and a romanticist of the 20th century. And he begins, the first few lines talk of this continuous process that is India. India is not just a country, it's a concept, it's a history. He says, at last, when the golden bird and its evening together vanish into the return of firefly mist, and fables replace the meaning of twilight with darkness. Earth stops. I watch the transactions of all life come faltering to an incomplete end, face unfurled in my fairy tale world without my Bonolota Shen. That's the name of the poem, Bonolota Shen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jatin Das, Mr. Ashoke Viswanathan. Thank you. Happy that you quoted Bonolota Sen, which I heard after a long, long time. Thank you very much. We have come to the end of a heavy day. From 9 o'clock, it's almost 6:45. Yeah, exactly 6:45. We now will give it